So, hello, good afternoon, good morning, maybe good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the second part of Turin's Naturally Online Symposium. I hope you had a fantastic lunch break. I hope you enjoyed the morning sessions, which were related very much to industry practitioners, top academic research, cutting edge knowledge that is currently available. And now I would like to invite you to a little bit different perspective. So we have already started discussing that technologies right now, including smart technologies and multiple sensors, they do revolutionize the way how tourism industry works. And I'm absolutely delighted to have an opportunity to invite one of the global leaders in neuromarketing research and biometric technologies, which are available right now, the future is now, to observe human behavior, to evaluate tourist emotions and experiences, to better understand what they actually feel, what they think, how they perceive tourist products. So please welcome our guests, iMotions, which is a global leader in neuromarketing software. They are developers of the software, and they are also the leaders in research and consultancy in this field. Paolo, Jessica, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Katerina. I'm just going to share my screen here. Let's see, here we go. Are we good to go? Yes, we are. Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session today, and thank you so much for coming by and seeing what we have to offer. My name is Jessica, and I'm joined by my colleague Paolo. We'll talk a little bit about ourselves and our background before we get into the meat of things. So I'm currently the technical director of iMotions North America. My background is in neuroscience and in research. About a lifetime ago, I was studying Parkinson's disease in individuals, and I've been doing research for a little over a decade in multiple different models and different scenarios. And it's really my passion and my privilege to be able to help bring these technologies to new industries and to really bridge that gap between the kinds of things I was doing in academic research and bringing them to different industry verticals and all sorts of different manifestations and sort of seeing what's possible with neuroscience and industry. Paolo, would you like to say something?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Paolo, and I'm connecting from the iMotions office in Copenhagen, Denmark. And yeah, as you can see from the slide, my background is more from the math and data perspective. With iMotions, I've been working for several years now with the biosensors and modeling of the signals we can collect with such sensors, especially in a mobile context, which is what I'm going to tell you more about today.
Awesome. So just as a little bit of background as to why we're even speaking at this conference, I think this is a really exciting field with a lot of potential. And the way we sort of wanted to frame it at the very beginning is from the lens of attention and emotion. Now, attention and emotion are really integral to the tourism experience in multiple ways. So for me, if I'm booking a vacation, there's many different elements where these factors can come into play. First off, it's thinking about the kinds of destinations that I want to look at. So as I'm flipping through my options, what places look attractive to me? What places appeal to me on a personal level? It could be going to a cottage for a weekend, visiting someplace really exotic, or going to someplace with awe-inspiring views. All of these can mean different things to me at different times. Once I pick my destination and make that choice, then I have to think about logistics. What's the best way to get there? Are there certain, elements that are really attractive to me, like a scenic tour through the countryside, or are there things a little bit more anxiety inducing? Maybe I have a fear of flights, and that's going to impact how I look at things. Once I figure out how I get to my destination, then it's all of the fun stuff, the actual experience that I'm going to have. And for me, that's going to be food. That's always going to matter a lot to me. But for many other people, it can mean many different things. It can mean the places that you're going to be staying at. And it could be the goal that you have going into a particular place. Are you going to be looking for something really exciting, like going whitewater rafting, or do you really just want to be on a beach alone, just peace and quiet? And all of these mean different things to different people, again, at different times. And they're all going to affect the kinds of decisions that we make and the kinds of feelings and anticipation that we have when booking an actual experience. Now, emotions at the end of the day are how we assign labels to good and bad, and that ultimately drives decision making. So for me, if you present a nice piece of cake in front of me, I'm going to assign that with the label of good. But if you give me, a piece of stinky cheese, I might assign the label of bad to that. But emotions are also heavily context dependent, and they're extremely flexible. So say I might go to France and end up doing a cheese tour, and I'm presented with a piece of stinky cheese that I actually think is amazing, then we can change our good and bad labels depending on our experiences, depending on our memories, our preconceptions, and the kinds of experience and new information that we use to take in. So ultimately, emotion and attention help to tag information as relevant. And this is really important in the hospitality experience in several dimensions. But first off, you have a particular stimulus that is going to trigger a certain response that is then going to be incorporated in wider storage. So sort of the engram of memories that you create as you go through a particular experience, as you with your family, as you're doing something amazing or seeing something awe-inspiring. All of this comes together into ultimately, the experiences, the sights, the smells, the sounds, all of that that happens within tourism, within travel, within that experience. So usually, when we try to assess emotion and attention, and we do that a lot over here at iMotions, the most common and easiest method to actually assess people's behavior is simply to ask, hey, what did you think of that? Or why did you make that decision? Or what drove you towards this place or towards this item? And self-report is definitely easy to work with, but it also has its caveats. Frankly, you're dealing with our own internal biases, our own internal attitudes, our memories, or our recall of an event. Even the lexicon, like the language that we use to describe our emotions, can often differ between people. Some people don't have the right verbiage to be able to talk about what they're really feeling internally. Even things like language barriers, which is something that you probably deal with quite often in the hospitality industry, is something that we also have to contend with when talking about describing what's going on internally, what we pay attention to, what we react to. So this is really where biological signals come in, and the use of biosensor tools, and we'll go over some examples of these later on. They can really extend these traditional methods by really getting to the meat of what we're feeling or experiencing in the moment. What are we paying attention to? What is the intensity of our reactions? What is the valence of those reactions? And how does that then relate to behavior? So what you're getting at then is sort of the unfiltered physiological response to something in the moment. And with that, we're not trying to replace self-report methods and questionnaires. They're actually extremely useful. But by having these two methods work in tandem, you get this much more holistic view of how someone is reacting in the moment, how that drives decision making, and then how they then talk about their feelings subsequently afterwards. So this is where really iMotions comes in, and we've been around for about 15 years now, specializing in the biosensor space. Just in short, how we specialize in this is that, as Katarina mentioned, we are a software platform, and we integrate multiple kinds of biosensor inputs, everything from eye tracking, skin conductance, facial expression analysis, heart rate, EEG. We'll actually get into all of those if you're not familiar with them. But we basically put them all into one place and provide an easy platform for you to collect data, analyze data, generate insights. And then we also provide consultation to go over what exactly these sensors mean and what they can mean for you and your research. So with that background done, a quick sort of overview of what we're going to try and cover over the next 60 to 90 minutes. We're going to do a quick intro to biosensor tools. This will include eye tracking, facial expression analysis, GSR, EEG, heart rate as well. We can touch on that. Then we're going to dive a little bit into biosensors and tourism research and what are some examples that we've seen from our clients and just also in the landscape in general. And then we're going to get into how those sensors have evolved given the pandemic. So how do we do research remotely? And we'll talk a little bit about our online data collection module where you can actually deploy studies internationally over the internet. And then Paula will touch on the mobile research platform, which allows you to collect data out in the wild. And then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So with that, let's start with an intro to biosensor tools. And this sort of essential toolbox is great because each tool really gives you a separate piece of information that when you use them all together in tandem, it again provides you that sort of holistic view of how someone's reacting in the moment. So our first and most popular sensor is eye tracking. And it's also the most common that we really see. And eye tracking is really powerful because it gives you a sense of visual attention or where people are directing their attention. So where are they looking? How long are they looking for? How often do they look in a particular area? And is this something that we can generalize from the individual to the population? So usually this involves a piece of hardware that you would actually stick onto your computer monitor. And what the kinds of data you can get are some really sweet visualizations you can sort of preview up top here. So you can get gaze replays so that on an individual level, this can tell you where someone is looking at a given time and in what order people look at things within a given scene here. We'll see some examples of that. Once you have the individual data, you can actually aggregate and get what's called a heat map. And a heat map gives you a nice sort of visual aggregation of where people are focusing their attention most. And this is shown here in color as sort of hotspots. So in this scene of Times Square, you can see that a lot of people are focusing their attention here on sort of the main advertisements in the middle, the Coke sign, and less so on the surrounding advertisements here. But if you do need to have something a bit more quantifiable, say you want to run some statistics and get some actual metrics out of it, you can also draw what are called areas of interest. And this allows you to draw boxes around different elements that you're interested in. And this will derive some specific metrics like how long on average did people take to notice the Coke sign compared to other ads? How much time did people spend looking at the Coke sign compared to other ads? And what percentage of your population actually noticed the Coke ad compared to other ads? So there's a lot of different ways in which you can slice and dice eye tracking data. It's what a lot of our clients end up starting with just because it is so powerful and gives you so much information right off the bat. The reason why eye tracking is also so popular is that it is definitely the most flexible of all of our sensors, and you can have eye tracking setups for every kind of study that you can think of. A lot of people will start out with remote or screen-based studies. So you'll often see this if you're showing images of destinations or if you have websites for booking hotels or experiences. You can have sort of these controlled screen-based studies where you can just see where people are looking on the screen. As we get into sort of more in the wild or live collections, and Paolo will talk a lot about this with the mobile platform, but there's also eye tracking glasses that you can wear, which will actually capture what you're looking at as you're navigating a space. And this could be a store, this could be an attraction. We also have options for phone and tablet. And then actually, this is an option that I'm the most excited about and that we're seeing a lot of advances right now is VR with built-in eye tracking. So if you actually want to have virtual experiences of a place, and we've tried doing it with Google Earth, that's super cool to work with. You can actually see where people are looking in a custom virtual space and really have that sort of immersive experience as sort of that in between like a controlled lab setup and actually physically going to an area. The second sensor that we use is facial expression analysis. And this is really getting at, if I were to crack a smile at a particular scene, when does that happen? How big of a smile is it? And, sort of what elicits that reaction? So we're really sort of getting at the physical, emotional content of the face as it's being shown. And there are several sort of computer learning or computer vision engines on the market that will actually take a webcam feed of an individual and map out the kinds of facial expressions they're making at a given time. And we use one called Affectiva. This is the main engine that we work with in the academic space. And what Affectiva's Afdex engine does is they take a video feed and they isolate the face and sort of map these landmarks on the face. And you'll sort of see an example of that later on. And using computer vision, they're able to essentially see, how are the features of the face moving and, the differences in the textures of the face to output your facial expressions as a probability. So how probable are you that you're showing anger, that you're smiling, that you're surprised, and so on. One big advantage about Affectiva, and a question that we get asked a lot, is sort of the validity of the data. And with any AI, the quality of an AI is about as good as the data that you use to train it. So Affectiva's engine is based off of over 6 million faces from 87 different countries. This map gives you sort of an overview of the breakdown. So what you get then is an engine that is representative of a large population, a wide range of ethnicities, a wide range of adult age ranges, which makes it really robust for different populations, regardless of who you want to test. The third sensor is skin conductance. And this one looks a little bit more techy. It's this little sort of device here that sort of sits on the wrist. And skin conductance is also known as galvanic skin response, electrodermal activity. Those are all names for the same thing. But what it really gets at is physiological arousal. So if you were to see something that's really exciting to you, so say there's a sale on a flight that you really want to book and you get really excited, or you see, something that is, arousing in a negative way, for example, what you get is sort of this internal sympathetic response that includes a slight uptick in your skin sweat. Now, what skin conductance measures is the changes in the conductance of your skin as a function of that skin sweat. And what we're able to see then are sort of these little bumps in your skin conductance that correspond to things that you are reacting to in the moment. So what it really gets at then, if facial expressions give you a sense of valence, whether you're reacting positively or negatively to a stimulus, skin conductance will give you the intensity of that reaction. How excited are you by seeing this experience or by having this interaction? And the two together work really well within those domains of valence and arousal to get at a sense of how you're reacting in the moment. We'll sort of breeze through the rest. Eye tracking, facial expressions, and skin conductance work really well together as sort of your basic starter. I like to call them the Holy Trinity, because what you get at is attention, valence, and intensity all together in like a really nice little package. And in terms of a learning curve, it's really easy to get started out. But we have advanced tools beyond that we can also dive into. EEG, or electroencephalography, is a really popular one. You've seen sort of these headsets with those wires coming out the back that look very science fiction-y, but now there's a lot of commercial headsets available that are really easy to work with, easy to put on, very user-friendly. And one of the things that you can get at with EEG is a sense of approach or avoidance motivation. So if I were to see something that I'm extremely drawn to, like I see a great photo of Greece and I go, I really want to go to Greece. I really want to go to that place. Or if I see sort of a local food that I think it looks a little bit weird and I go, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if I want to try that. That sort of sentiment of wanting to take action or get away from something is something that can also be measured through EEG. And this is a measure that originally came from the psychological literature, but is now being used in all sorts of different marketing applications. We see it a lot in consumer insights, product testing, video testing, and is easily something that can also be extended to the tourism industry. So with that sort of overview, the thing I really want to emphasize is that no one sensor is going to do the job completely. Like I said, a lot of these different sensors will each only give you a little piece of the puzzle. And it's really like three blind men and an elephant, where one feels the ears, one feels the tail, one feels the side, and they all say this is what an elephant is. When you really put it all together, that's when you get the whole elephant. And this is an example taken from Nielsen Neuroscience, which is a big consumer insights company that has labs across the world. They actually did a study. In this case, it was looking at product advertisements, but again, this can easily be transferred over to the tourism industry. What they did is they had participants look at over 60 different advertisements across 20 different product categories and looked at how much each sensor contributed to the variance in terms of their subsequent purchasing behavior. So whether they were likely to actually purchase that product after watching the ad. And if you just look at facial coding alone, it really accounts for less than 10% of the variance. Survey, biosensors like skin conductance and EEG, each of these do okay on their own. But when you take the EEG and the biosensors and the facial expressions combined, that accounts for even higher variance. And then when you add survey to the mix, then that accounts for almost 80% of the explained variance in actually looking at the ad and then following through with subsequent buying behavior after that. So really, the more information you can sort of add into your model and the more sensors that you can pick that fit in within that research question will help give you more information to work with. And this is an approach that we really try to encourage. So with that, what are some examples that we've already seen in tourism research? And I'm going to go through 3 different examples. The first is booking a flight. The second is evaluating a hotel. And the third is exploring an attraction. And some of the stuff that we've done internally, others we've seen our clients do, and we'll sort of cite specific resources. But this will just give you a little bit of a sense of what people are currently doing and hopefully give you some ideas for your own research direction on places you can take it. Pardon the pun, I guess, but different directions that you can take your research with these tools. So the first is booking a flight. This is a study that we actually did in-house, comparing the usability of 3 different websites, Virgin, Southwest, and Spirit Airlines. I'm based in Ohio, as you can tell, so these are all US airlines. But we had these 3 websites and we evaluated them through 3 different tasks. The first is finding the destination map, the usability of that. Second is booking a flight, and the third is finding the cost of checked baggage. Now, I don't know if any of you have actually flown Spirit Airlines before in the US, but it is a little bit of a nightmare. Their website is really not that intuitive. And I'll show you an example from actually, recording by yours truly. But this is a snippet from our software where you can actually see the brow furrow data here in brown. We have our skin conductance here in blue underneath, showing the level of arousal I have in the moment. You have the webcam here showing my reactions to things. There's a little sneak preview of what's going to happen. And then we actually have my experience as I'm going through the website live on the left. So if I press play, what we're doing is looking for the cost of checked baggage. And this little bouncy dot moving around is actually the data coming in from the eye tracker. So you can see exactly what I'm interacting with in the moment. And then also we have our mouse movements here that are being logged. When you are looking for the cost of checked baggage on Spirit Airlines, many airlines are actually very good about this. They have the pricing up front if you just know where to find it. With Spirit, they don't actually give you the cost of checked baggage. What you do is you have to fill out this widget here called the Bagotron, where you have to put in your flight information before they tell you how much the bags will actually cost. This is a terrible design decision. First off, because you actually have to have one extra step where you put in your flight information and have to look up the numbers and all that sort of thing to get the info you need. The second is that you might not even have a flight booked. You just want to know how much bags cost. And this is one barrier to you actually getting the information that you need. So you can see here as I interact, I really don't have a good time with this. This is my brow furrow level here. So just the act of bringing my 2 brows together and this sort of expression of consternation or frustration, it's often really correlated with negative valence or negative sort of experiences. And what we found is that across all 3 tasks, Spirit Airlines outperformed the other 2 websites in the amount of brow furrow elicited by people. This correlated really nicely to the amount of time people took to complete the tasks. It took people a lot longer to finish them on Spirit Airlines compared to the other 2. I'll play that again. And it also correlated with self-reported ease of use. So when we had people report, how easy was this experience going through each website, Spirit Airlines ranked the lowest, again, correlating nicely with the amount of brow furrow people were showing with those tasks. The second example is evaluating hotels. And my favorite example comes from Expedia. So Expedia has a very sophisticated usability lab that they've had for several years now. I think they've expanded to other countries. I'm not sure if they've done that. But what they use is a combination of eye tracking and facial expressions. They're not using the webcam base in this case. They're actually recording the muscle activity from the face directly, but it's really the same thing. And what they're doing is they're just bringing people in, having them book their vacations on Expedia in their lab, and seeing for each individual's personal experience, where are they looking and what are they reacting to? The goal is that by getting in as many people as they can to book their vacations, they can actually start drawing generalizations for different demographic groups to see what actually in the booking experience are people drawn to, what are they reacting most to, And they can use that to drive insights on the kinds of things that they might want to emphasize for a given demographic moving forward. So one such example is that people from France, for example, tended to smile more or show delight, as they called it, when they saw that there was breakfast available at a hotel. And if they saw photos of lavish spreads of food, people from France tended to respond really well to that. So they saw that they were looking at the food and also eliciting more smiling behavior. So they thought, okay, whenever we have Expedia France, we're going to really try and highlight the food at a place from here on in. Millennials, for example, really enjoyed closet space. So if you were to show a hotel room with a very large closet, people tended to smile more at that. And they're like, okay, for millennial populations, we're going to make sure that we emphasize closet space from here on in. Well-appointed bathrooms, specific amenities. So by just sort of having this shotgun approach to collecting a ton of data with all of this behavioral input, they can really derive some interesting models that can help, in design decisions for Expedia's website moving forward, depending on the kind of consumer that's going to be using their website. The third is exploring an attraction. And I want to cite one of our clients here, which is the Museum of Science in Boston, Massachusetts, in the US. So the Museum of Science came to us and said, we're really interested in looking at how our attendees perceive our new exhibits. So what they did is they got eye tracking glasses and skin conductance, and were able to sort of run some more controlled tests of if they were to have a new exhibit on electricity, for example, that had new interactive elements. How often do people attend to the interactive elements versus the text? Are there elements that really drive a lot of the attention, or are there other elements that get ignored? And as they change, different iterations of the exhibit to sort of match, the feedback they're getting from attendees, how does that change people's overall experience or perception of that exhibit? And really using sort of this science-driven approach to tweak the kinds of experience and the kinds of exhibit that they want their respondents to have. So this is an example of sort of a preview here from eye tracking glasses as someone is coming up to a shelf, for example. And what we're able to do is take that eye tracking data and sort of map it here onto this 2D image. What we're able to get then is sort of a heat map of how, if people are approaching the shelf, where are they attending to most, what's capturing the most attention, how much time are people spending in a given area, and what elements are getting ignored. Now, with these tools, conventionally, we've had people come into the lab to do these kinds of studies. There is stuff that you are going to be putting on people, equipment and so on, and the control of a lab environment is really attractive for a lot of studies. However, with the pandemic and with just sort of the way research has been going in these various fields, there's really been a high demand for being able to do research in a remote setting. And we'll go over 2 examples of this. I'm going to go through our online data collection platform, and Paolo's going to go through the mobile research platform. But the challenge, though, is that with the pandemic, labs just weren't being used. People didn't want to share equipment, putting them from one person to the next. And there was really this demand for, is there any way that we can collect data from people while they're in their own homes? And this is really where the online data collection module was born. So what this allows you to do is use your webcam to actually collect eye tracking and facial expression data from people in their own homes. And you can actually design studies with images, videos, or websites, and actually upload them to the cloud, and then actually distribute them online to different populations wherever you like. So what that gives you then is not only the safety of being able to collect remotely, but also really removing the bounds of geography and the logistics of having to physically bring people into a lab. For those that are doing university research, your participant pool is the student body at that university, right? It's a very restricted sample size. But what you can do with an online data collection module like this is be able to send your study to different states in the US. Or if you wanted to look at Western versus Eastern populations, you can send those studies online to people on either side. So it really allows you to get a little bit more diversity in your population, which can lead to some interesting insights. So to this end, basically how this works is you would design a study, upload it to iMotions Cloud, and it'll give you sort of a URL that you can distribute either using a panel provider or your own email service. You can actually monitor the state of data collection as it's happening, and then analyze within iMotions to derive those similar measures like facial expression content, heat maps, and so on. So you might have noticed something different when I talk about ODC, and that is the use of our webcam-based eye tracking. And like I mentioned, if you're using eye tracking in a lab, that will basically involve a custom piece of hardware. So an actual eye tracker that you would stick onto the bottom of your monitor that is specially designed to track where people are looking on a screen. If you're collecting data remotely, obviously you can't use that little piece of hardware. You can't ship it to every participant out there. So we've developed our own webcam-based eye tracking algorithm. So using a simple webcam like the one built into your laptop or any sort of Logitech USB webcam you get off of Amazon, what we're able to do is record the face and actually record where the eyes are looking on the screen. And again, map where people are looking on your screen, and again, derive some heat maps like this. So down below, we have a couple of examples of people looking at different rooms and seeing where do people focus on. We have this more minimalist room here on the right, and then a slightly more rustic, more heavily decorated room on the left. And you can see that there are some clear differences in where people tend to focus. On the minimalist room on the right with fewer features, people tend to focus more on specific elements than others. It's a lot less diffuse. Whereas a more chaotic, busier scene like this tends to draw attention all over the place. So you see a much more diverse heat map of visual attention spread across the entire image. Now, one of the caveats of using webcam-based eye tracking is that we're actually using a computer algorithm to detect the eyes. And I have to sort of talk about this as a caveat whenever we do talk about webcam-based eye tracking. A lot of people get really focused on the convenience of it, but less so on sort of the technical caveats. So when you are using webcam-based eye tracking, we're using computer vision to actually look at the eyes, detect them in the face, and then see where they're looking. And this is sort of an example of different eyes that we can see, that the camera would see as we're doing the webcam-based eye tracking. And you can see that there's a lot of different, varying qualities of picture. So an eye like this up here in the top right will do really well with webcam-based eye tracking, whereas this one down below on the bottom left, probably not so much. So what you're going to get then is a trade-off between the convenience of using webcam-based eye tracking with sort of the kind of accuracy and yield that you're going to get. Typically, if normal eye tracking is up here with high accuracy and high yield, so all of your participants yielding some sort of good data, webcam eye tracking will usually have less accuracy and less yield. And you have to account for that in the kinds of designs that you're going to be running. Now, what can affect webcam-based eye tracking? There's a lot of different factors here. We can look at sort of bad lighting conditions, upload issues, video encoding issues, and so on. All of this basically means is that because there's more moving parts in deploying a study remotely, you do have to account for that with a larger sample size. So if, for any sort of lab study where we have eye tracking and facial expressions, we recommend sort of a sample size of 30. Typically, if we're doing it online, we would recommend doubling or even tripling that sample size. So you just have to be mindful of that if you do decide to use remote tools. But to assure sort of the best kind of quality, if you are collecting data from people's homes, some factors can really come into play here. So having really good lighting conditions in a person's home, making sure people are seated in front of a camera head on and nicely, and that they're actually following instructions, not moving. One of the things that I noticed collecting data remotely is that you'll get a lot of people on the couch with the laptop on their knees. Probably not the ideal sort of scenario for collecting data. People are eating, some people have their shirts off. That makes it kind of weird. So being able to give good instructions and assure good compliance from your participant population is really important when you're collecting studies on such a broad level like this. So with that, I'm going to throw it over to Paolo to talk about our mobile research platform where you can actually collect data out in the wild.
Yes, thank you, Jessica. And yes, I will just ask you to move forward the slides. Perfect. So yeah, what we talked so far about, what Jessica showed you, where our solutions for research in the lab, and then online data collection, so with a web browser. And what I'm going to cover now is a slightly different approach, that is to use a smartphone to collect data, and this way move your lab outside. So really not be limited to any specific location for your studies, for your data collection, but just allow your participants to move around in their space and collect data for longer periods of time, and still have data then uploaded and synchronized to the cloud. And for one of the reasons, or some of the reasons we decided to work on this platform for mobile research is really that we want to make it possible to collect data using mobile devices and still keep the multimodal approach that we have across the board. And that it means that you can connect several sensors and collect data from various sources at the same time. And that can be done in a modular fashion so that you can tailor your study setup to the specific research question you want to answer. But let's move forward to the next slide. Thank you. This is the way we approach this problem of mobile research. And that is based on a cloud platform that is here represented in the middle, that is used both by the researchers to set up a study and then monitor the ongoing study, and is used by the participants. They interact with the study using their smartphone, and the smartphone runs an app that can connect to the different sensors that are being used, and also provides interactions in the study. And that might sound a bit abstract now, but I'm going to show a few examples in a minute of use cases that you can cover using this technology. So these are actually some examples of the sensors that you can use in this kind of research. And keep in mind that the focus here is really a study where your participants are moving out of about, maybe they are, if they're tourists, if that's the focus of your research, you could recruit participants among actual tourists at a given location, provide them with the hardware, and then let them explore the location and collect data at the same time. And so things that can be relevant here could, for instance, be among the internal phone sensors, things like a step counter, so that can give you a measure of how much people are walking, how fast they're walking, so the distances they're covering. And that can be paired also with location tracking, either based on GPS or on beacons, if the focus is an indoor location tracking. And then, of course, that is often paired with wearable sensors. So that is to add the physiological aspect to the study and to the data collection. So you could, for instance, collect heart rate data with various heart rate monitors that can be connected to a smartphone. You could use eye tracking, and in particular, eye tracking glasses. So that's like in some of the examples that Jessica showed you before, and smartwatches of different types. And then all the sensing aspect is paired with self-reporting. And I think that's a key factor here, because as we also saw in the example by Nielsen that was mentioned before by Jessica, we really observed that sensors and biometrics combined with self-reporting is often a very good way to run a study, because it provides a combination of objective data that is collected using the sensors and something that the participants are reporting themselves using questionnaires or surveys or other types of self-reporting that can be built into your study. We can move to the next. Yes. And one way of doing that, so combining the sensor data with the self-reporting, is using what we call the trigger task logic. So you can set various conditions. That could be time of the day, that could be based on location, could also be based on some of the sensor data that you're collecting. And once the condition you defined is verified, then you can send a notification to your participant on the phone that they're using to participate in the study. And that could include a survey if you want to ask them a question that is based on the context, based on the specific situation they are in at the moment, or could be a task. For instance, that could be find a specific landmark in the area if you want to verify how easy it is to navigate a location, and so on. So that also adds both interactivity in your mobile study and also contextual information. And speaking about context, I think that's a point that is important to talk about a little bit more. Look at this example. So here the timeline is actually in hours. So you're looking at more than 12 hours worth of heart rate data that we collected using a wearable sensor. So how to interpret that? Well, that's a really difficult task because if you just look at the signal as it is, you have no context at all. So when you see an elevated heart rate value, you don't know if that's because your participant is maybe feeling stressed or agitated for some reason, or maybe they're just running to catch a bus. So trying to have context added to your data is very important. So if we go one slide forward, yes. That's an example of context. So that's something that you can add in various ways to your data and really helps with interpretation. So here the context is given by this annotation that tell you about the activity or the location where your participant was at various times. So we can see that some of the lower values of heart rate were associated with just sitting still in the office at work, and then higher heart rate during the commute, exercising, again lower heart rate when they were at home, and then sleep and so on. So that's something that really helps in the interpretation and the analysis of data that you collect. And if we go on slide, yes. Yeah, at the top I have this quote that is, yeah, it's maybe a bit depressing the first time you look at it, but on the other hand, it should be used as an indication, as a reminder that you should always make sure that you have the right tools to interpret the data that you're collecting. And to add this context to your data, you could, for instance, if we're talking about mobile research, one way would be to collect location data together with the wearable sensors. And location can, as an example before, tell you where the participant was and therefore help with interpretation of the data. Context would also be video or pictures. So it's if it was a study with eye tracking glasses, there naturally you would have a video from the participant's point of view that would help with interpreting the data. Otherwise, you could use other types of cameras or to add some video and visual data to your signals. And finally, self-reporting and questionnaires. You could also just simply every once in a while ask your participants where they are, if they are at work, if they're at home, if they are exercising. And again, that would be another way to add context. So that's something really to keep in mind when you are designing a study that is, especially for a mobile study that is outside of the lab. And finally, one remark is that multimodality, which is really I think the point that both Jesse and I are trying to hammer home, is that multimodality is something that helps you add context because you're collecting data from several sensors, several devices, maybe combined with self-reporting, and that really makes it easier to interpret and then to analyze the data that you collected. So next, I wanted to say a bit more about the specific types of sensors that we can use in mobile research and share a bit about what we feel are the most suited for various applications. So I mentioned briefly before the step counter, and that's often paired with an accelerometer. And so these are sensors that are usually embedded in the smartphones. So you don't need any external hardware to collect these data, and can be very helpful if you want to run a data collection for over a long period of time where your participants are moving around, maybe they're walking in an environment. And this way you can know how far they're walking, how fast they're going. And if you want to do something more precise, you could just look at the raw accelerometer data and get even more granular information. For instance, be able to discriminate whether they are walking or maybe running, cycling, or maybe in transit and sitting on a train or a bus. So lightweight sensor that is, as I said, it's already embedded in most smartphones. So it's usually very helpful for many mobile study designs. Next slide, please. Location tracking. Yes, so that I mentioned that before as a contextual information, but in fact, it can also just be the main sensor that you might want to use in a specific study. So we all know GPS. So that's the way to collect the location data when the participants are outdoors. If you're inside a building instead, GPS is usually not the right choice because you don't get signal. On the other hand, you can use other indoor location tracking systems. And one of them is location beacons, which can tell the proximity of the device or the smartphone that a participant is carrying to the beacon that is placed in a specific location. So if you could imagine, for instance, an indoor attractions, a museum, and you can place different beacons in different rooms in the museum, and then this way be able to track when the participants are in each of the rooms. In the example here, sorry, I just want to say a few more words about this. Here you can see the route that the participant was moving along, and that's paired with the heart rate value at that location. So that's also one way to visualize multimodal data, the heart rate combined with the location. And then in this case, you can see which areas along the path are associated with an elevated heart rate. And that again can be used to either infer something about the location or perhaps about the movement of the participant if they were running faster and thereby getting elevated heart rate. Next slide, please. And yes, again, about heart rate, I just wanted to mention basically how good of a choice in many cases it is if you want to run experiments outside of the lab. So one reason why I really like heart rate monitors is that they provide a quite robust signal, and you can find them in various form factors. So you can have chest straps like the Polar H10 that we show here at the top of the slide, or the other ones are arm-based, either wristbands or armbands. And either way, they provide a signal that's quite robust. It works even when the participants are moving around. It's very easy to set up. Typically, these devices are developed initially were developed for sports, so they are quite robust and easy to set up. And in the chest straps are based on ECG, so the electrocardiography. So they have a different technology than the arm-based ones that instead use light diode and PPG to measure the heart rate. But either one can be a way to monitor the heart, and the data you collect can then be used for analysis such as heart rate variability, which in turn can provide insights about stress and fatigue, and again, help you better understand the physiological processes that were happening with your participants at a given time. Next slide, please. And yeah, so here just briefly, I wanted to give you a visual impression of how iMotion can support this kind of mobile research. These are a few screens from our mobile app that you can use to run studies, such as the ones that I talked about just now, connecting various sensors. And at the same time, as you can see in the screen in the middle, the app can be used to send out notifications to the participants, in this case, a survey task. And the participants can take the task on the phone itself, and this way provide self-reported data for your study. And so again, all what we were saying about contextual information. Next slide, please. Yes, and now I just wanted to walk you through a couple of use cases that we have developed using these technologies. So yes, the first one is what we call the location heat map. So what you see on the screen is a map of a part of Copenhagen, and you see with a red line, I highlighted one of the main landmarks here for tourists. Everybody who visits Copenhagen the first time has to go and see the Little Mermaid. And I thought it would be interesting to see how one could try to track and visualize the movements of visitors in this area. So you can see there is this attraction, then in the middle there is this sort of park where people can walk through, and on the left side of the screen there is a train station, which is the nearest train station to the Little Mermaid. So next slide. So the way to do that in this example was to use the GPS tracking on the participants' phones, and so this way we can record their location over time. And then once we collect data from a number of people, then we can find a way to aggregate. And that's the visualization that you have here. In fact, we talked before with Jessica about heat maps for visual attention. And this is a different kind of heat map, because instead it shows the location, so an aggregated view of the location data. And where you have green color, it means that there was some people walked or were in the vicinity of that for some time. And when it gets yellow and red, that means that more people were standing at that location for a longer period of time. So if you did that over a city and you had your participants explore, you would be able to get a visual impression of which areas are hotspots. And then, of course, you could dig down and into the data and look more into details and, for instance, see what the paths that various participants took where. And then, of course, since we always want to combine the sensor data with some self-reporting and contextual information, another thing that you could do here is to define an active area, again, using GPS location tracking, to build a trigger that notifies and shows the service to the visitors when they are in that area. So again, as an example, when they are in the vicinity of the Little Mermaid, then you could send out a survey question asking something about that specific location. And I think another advantage here, and haven't mentioned that before, is that you get to ask your survey question precisely at the time when the interaction happens. So in this case, precisely when they are close to the Little Mermaid. And so this way you can try to better capture the immediate reaction and impression that the participants had of the location, as opposed to sending a survey maybe at the end of the day or a week after, when people would have to sit down and try to remember what was going on. Yeah, the second one is an example that for data collection that we run here in Copenhagen, and it combines eye tracking glasses with wearable sensors. And there is a little video that we can try to play. So it's similar to what Jessica was showing before in the museum context. Just that here we're not limited by any specific location, because the eye tracking glasses and the other sensors are connected to a smartphone. So in this case, our participant is riding a bicycle through Copenhagen. They have the eye tracking glasses on, so we can see the gaze where they were looking at over time. And if you look in the signals at the bottom, maybe it's a bit small, but you can see the first 3 lines. They are based on the GPS signal. So they tell you the coordinates and then the speed measured, inferred from GPS. And the graph at the bottom is actually the heart rate. So again, we can combine the physiological signal recorded with a wearable heart rate monitor with the contextual information, in this case, both the GPS coordinates and the video coming from the eye tracking glasses. So again, another type of study that perhaps can support types of research that also have a qualitative part to them, where you could rewatch the video, the actual video of how a participant experienced a certain location. Yes, I think we can probably move on.
Yeah, Thank you, Paolo. So with that, we'll just sort of wrap it up here, but just in summary, to go over what we covered over the past hour, just looking at the idea of emotion and attention and how they are factors in the tourism industry across all the different stages of planning, execution, and evaluation in the moment. Emotion and attention are, instead of being nebulous cognitive concepts, they can be measured through a combination of biosensor tools and self-report, whether it's surveys done afterward or, as Paolo just demonstrated, surveys done in the moment. Research can be screen-based or done in live environments, but with the advent of sort of these new tools that have developed in part due to the pandemic, but just also the desire to just collect more and more data in more naturalistic settings, either online within people's own homes or using mobile integrations like the mobile research platform, we can get at a sense of how people are reacting, feeling in the moment as they're going through an experience live, and really opens up some new vistas in this kind of research. So all of that to sort of summarize, at the end of the day, we are iMotions. We are a software platform that allows all this stuff to happen. We also resell the biosensors and hardware, so all the tools that you saw previewed here. And then the third bucket that we really like to hang our hat on is our support and services. So consultations with researchers, training, education. We really try to sink a lot of resources into that, especially for those for whom these technologies are new and they're really curious and want to get into it. We've been powering academic labs and commercial labs all across the world. So we cater to both academia and industry. And if you're interested in learning more, if you would like a free consultation, you can always email marketing@imotions.com. We'll be happy to sit down and see the kind of work that you're doing and how we can best fit in. If you're interested in some of the publications in tourism that do feature iMotions, you can head to imotions.com/publications and search in the tourism industry. This one's my favorite. It's actually a paper from 2018 looking at hospital service robots and how people perceive and interact with different prototypes of them with some eye tracking and GSR, which is really cool. And then if you really decide this is definitely for me and I want to just go, head first into it, we also have our iMotions Academy. That's a week-long biosensor boot camp where you and a bunch of other people, it's like a nice little tight-knit intensive where you really get your hands dirty with the sensors, meet with the team, and do your first pilot study. So with that, we will stop here, and thank you everyone for listening, and we'll be happy to field questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you so much, Paolo. Indeed, fantastically interesting, insightful, and basically that's the future of tourist experience, isn't it? Because we've been indeed trying to learn and search for ways to improve tourist experience by asking, by talking, but people forget, people change their opinion, people hide, people don't want to lie or to say truth sometimes because they want to be too polite without sharing what they really felt. And then in the end, they forget. So indeed, that kind of research is the future of tourism. And I'm happy that we actually have lots of questions already. I can read in the comments that actually there are people who already use such solutions among our guests, and that's fantastic, I believe. And the first question is basically about the application. So have you used these methods to study the appeal of natural environment? Really outside and virtual nature environment?
Yeah, that I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it sort of depends on the angle that you want to go for. I think sort of the restorative quality of natural environments, I know, is something that people are interested in. And I've actually seen some research groups that are interested in, especially in like healing settings like hospitals, introducing more natural environments in there. And then how does that sort of affect the restorative nature of the space, right? So there's a couple tools that we could look at. GSR, so like skin conductance, just to get at sort of a level of physiological arousal in the moment. So, if you were to be in a really intense space, that would go up, but in a restorative space, you would see that go down over time. One that we touched on, or that we didn't touch on too much, was heart rate and heart rate variability. And I think that would be a really good option in this space. So HRV basically looks at sort of the interaction of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems on heart. And in a sense, it gets at emotional flexibility in a way. So if you're in a space where you're depressed, bipolar, bereaved, very stressed out situations, your heart rate variability is actually very low. So your heartbeat is like a metronome, is just on time all the time. But in sort of more restorative scenarios, then you get a little bit more variability in your heartbeat. So a beat will get thrown out here, thrown out there, and you see sort of the variability increase and that value go up. So if you wanted to look at sort of the emotional restorative nature of natural spaces compared to some sort of other controlled environment, I think HRV and GSR would definitely be your best bet there.
And I can also chime in here. In fact, we just recently helped researchers who were working on a project along these lines, and their focus was exactly to look at how a natural environment, or maybe the simulation of a natural environment, could help relieve stress, and that was in a workplace context. And what they used there, using our mobile app, was in fact heart rate monitors to measure heart rate variability. And again, it was paired with surveys that were shown to the participants when they were in the area with the simulated natural environment. And right now they are looking at the data that was collected. But yes, I agree with Jessica. Heart rate and heart rate variability would be very good tools to use for this kind of research.
Thank you. And to continue the question from Lisa, I personally know, because I work with your solutions as well, that you have virtual reality setups with eye tracking. What would you suggest, for example, for studying nature-based tourism? For example, tourist experience, hikers, mountain experience, lake experience. How would you design such a study? Would you consider external measurement in the real environment, or would you consider simulating it with virtual reality?
Yeah, let's see. It really depends on the kind of question that you want to answer. And I think these sensors always work when you're comparing them to a reference, right? So if you wanted to sort of look at, if you wanted to look at whether a virtual naturalistic experience was really comparable to sort of the real thing, then you could have, have your virtual setup that you could have like a 360 video of actually going through the space, or some photogrammetry to really make it as authentic as possible and immersive, and have people go through the virtual environment versus having them go through the physical environment. And obviously there's going to be factors between the two of them that are different, the quality of the air that you're breathing, having to actually step over obstacles and so on, that are also going to affect your experience. So I think, getting at sort of the validity of those naturalistic environments as a reasonable proxy for the real thing, I think is always going to be a good first step. And then once you've sort of, established sort of some commonality between the virtual and the real environments, then you can sort of, dig a little bit deeper into the virtual one and how that can be used in a more extensive setting. Paolo, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with what you were saying, Jessica. And yeah, I think another key thing to keep in mind, and that's something that I often recommend to researchers, if you want to do research in the wild using the mobile platform or in general wearables, I think it's usually always good to try to limit as much as possible the number of sensors and different devices that you need to use. It can be tempting to say, let's collect as much data as we can, but then what ends up happening is that the participants will get overwhelmed and you will end up not getting any good data. So it's always good to start small, select a few sensors that are robust enough, that are designed for use outside of the lab, and just start from that and see what insights you can get from data.
Yeah, thank you for the insights. We have a couple of more questions. First of all, there are some methodological questions as well, but related to facial expression analysis. So you do the analysis based on a really huge sample of recorded emotions, but still, how do you handle different cultures and different ethnicities? So Maximilian asks, for example, if you work with different people, let's say from Asia, from different societies and cultures, a smile in a Vietnamese context might mean that people are shy or uncomfortable. That's why they smile. Or I used to live, sorry, in Hong Kong myself, and they tend to have blank face. So how do you handle these differences?
Yeah, no, that's a question we get a lot, and there's two directions we can take with it. So the first is definitely there are cultural differences in how people convey emotion. And that's really sort of something you have to keep in mind with facial expression analysis, is that you really are only getting at what's visible. And we know that, there are some cultures that are very expressive. And we see that with actors that can emote outwardly without necessarily feeling it internally. And then also there are cultures that can be very stoic in their countenance, but can still feel everything internally, right? So that is something that you have to keep in mind when designing your study and interpreting your results, is those cultural differences, especially if you're working with a certain population. But this is also the benefit of having a multimodal setup here, because skin conductance can get at that internal physiological condition, and that's not something you can control consciously. I'm not going to sit here and think I'm going to not sweat in response to this, right? Whereas facial expressions you can easily control. So having additional sensors in there can help fill in those gaps a little bit. Now, the other angle of it is sort of this interesting comment in the question about, Vietnamese people may laugh when feeling uncomfortable, for example, and that's really sort of a context dependent way of showing expression. Different engines try to get around it. For Affectiva, which is the engine that we talked about as sort of our main offering here, they're based off of the facial action coding system, which is sort of your academic standard for qualifying facial expressions. And it's really, an objective measure as just what facial expressions or movements are they making, and they try to remove the context from that as much as possible. So for some people that might work because it is sort of an academic standard. It's been in the literature for a while, and that's like sort of a validated method. There's another engine out there called Realize, which we also work with, that's designed for market research applications. They go about it in a different way, where their training data is actually evaluated by crowdsourcing. So if you were to have a bunch of training data of Vietnamese people laughing in response to an ad, that's actually evaluated locally by Vietnamese coders who say, oh, this person looks happy, or no, they're actually really uncomfortable. And that is how Realize tries to sort of get around those cultural differences. So that's something that they pay a little bit more attention to. So it can sort of also depend on the kind of tool that you want to use, and again, sort of the angle that you want to take. But that's always like a really interesting question, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops.
I have a quick question regarding this topic. So when you say that basically we can go around these cultural differences, could you think that maybe by analyzing the GSR data, we can basically comprehend whether facial expression is indeed happiness, or in other way could be feeling uncomfortable?
Yeah. GSR is a little bit tough for that, because it just gives you arousal or like a physiological intensity to something. And you can get that looking at a baby, and you can get that looking at a tiger. Like, it doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative, you're still going to get that high arousal response. So GSR is really tough to give you that. EEG might actually be a good measure if you want to dig into that, because that's where that sort of approach avoidance withdrawal comes from. So if I were to see something that, elicits happiness and makes me laugh, I'll probably have a greater approach motivation towards it. Whereas if I have that, like, I'm very uncomfortable and I want to extricate myself from this sort of sentiment, even if I am smiling outwardly, you might actually see that sort of avoidance motivation reflected in the EEG. So that could be another tool that you could bring in to dig a little bit more into that dynamic.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And we have time for a few more questions. And that's one of the most painful one, I guess, especially for European context. So how about GDPR? What do we do?
Paolo, being in Copenhagen, do you want to address this one first?
Yes. So of course, yeah, GDPR sets a quite strict set of requirements on the way to do research for at least for EU-based researchers. But we see that really as well, in a way, it is a challenge. We can't really not say that, but at the same time, it makes us improve the quality of our work and our software. And I think that the same applies to all researchers. So I think basically the message there is that we need to be super open about what data we are collecting, why we're collecting these data, and then of course, make sure that it's possible for the participants to give an informed consent. And then afterwards, if they decide that they change their mind, to have their data removed afterwards. And we were lucky enough that all these principles and considerations were already present when we started working on our mobile platform. And because of that, we have built those into the system. So when you invite your participants, they give consent to the study, and then they join the study with their own credentials. So they get a username and password to log in onto the phone. So that ensures that the data that is collected on the phone is associated with a specific person that is participating in the study. And then afterwards, once data is stored, it's encrypted on the server, and it's done in a way that data and all the personal information are kept separate. So I would say that's in the sense of architecture of the platform, that's as much as we can do to make it easy for researchers to be GDPR compliant when they use our solutions. Then, of course, there are types of data that inherently contain personal information. And let's think about GPS, for instance. You can remove all names and email addresses from your database, but if you're collecting GPS over several days, you will end up realizing where the person lives. So you have their address. So that's not great in terms of data protection. But what we can do there is then find specific ways to handle these data that contain personal information. And for GPS, that could be adding some noise to the data. That's one technique that is used. So you will, instead of recording the precise coordinates that come from the sensor, you will add some noise, or you will remove some precision. So maybe you will be able to see which neighborhood the person lives at, but not the specific address. And so this way, make the data, anonymize the data. And then the correct way of handling this will be dependent on the context, whether you're collecting data on healthy volunteers, or if it's in the context of healthcare research, if it's patients, and so they are thereby more protected by regulations. But I think all of that can be accommodated. The thing is that as a researcher, you need to think about GDPR and data protection upfront at the beginning when you start designing your study. And this way, you make it easy for yourself later when you're ready to run the study, to make sure that everything is compliant with the regulations. So it's more of a process than just a switch that you turn on or off.
Yeah, thank you. And well, one more question, which is a little bit different, but also kind of really important. Have you ever tried to engage real tourists? So lots of studies have been done actually in laboratories, or when participants are invited to participate to complete some tasks. Have you ever tried, let's say, to go to a location, maybe in tourism, maybe in real shopping environment, just to stop people and try to engage them into such kind of study? Is it possible?
I've seen it a lot in the sort of consumer insights, like marketing space, where, you know, if we're looking at storefronts, for example, and you have sort of a new thing and you want to see how people are traversing a grocery store, I've absolutely seen groups just recruit people off the street, and they'll have sort of a mobile lab outside where they put all the stuff on you and then they just send you in. And I think a lot of the eye tracking glasses, to their credit, have become a lot more, a lot less conspicuous in letting people know that there's like actually a sensor on your face. They just look like actual glasses. So they're a little bit more natural looking. Within the tourism industry, I've not seen it all that much. And I think it's because of a couple things. One, just sort of the state of the technology, like being able to collect data remotely like this is still very new. And we see it a lot more in academic research, and it hasn't necessarily bled over into industry applications just yet. The second is just sort of the considerations with, again, just privacy, GDPR, all those sorts of things. And it's just sort of, there's going to be a lot of red tape and logistics to go through before something like this would actually be available. And, if you were to have sort of a simple form factor, like a bracelet or something that like a hotel chain could put on people, I mean, there's a lot of sort of, legal and privacy considerations they have to go through to think about that, right? So I think for the time being, doing it within the constraints of research is, people are doing that right now. And I think that's sort of the easiest to implement within a controlled scenario, because there's, ethics committees and so on that can sort of keep it constrained. It'll be interesting as the technology evolves and things become more portable, less obvious, how this will actually manifest in an industrial setting. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
That's indeed really, really interesting. Thank you so much for a really insightful presentation. I see that there is some questions more and more coming about personal data, about GDPR and how to handle this research. But we are slowly running out of time. So I would really encourage everyone to get in touch with iMotions, because they have fantastic database, knowledge base about how to do that. Also, I would like to invite you to stay in touch till the evening. So in about 1 hour, I will try to catch up. So Jessica and Paolo shared fantastic overview of what is possible now. The future is now already. So in about 1 hour, we'll also have a small workshop showing these data in more details. So how exactly the data of facial expression analysis might look like, how exactly the GSR data might look like, and how you can start interpreting it in tourism contexts, how people reacted, and how you can get inferences out of that. So those who are interested, you are more than welcome to continue this topic in about an hour, also based on the platform of iMotions. But at this point, I would like to thank the team of Jessica and Paolo for coming. Thank you very much for dedicating your time. If you, don't mind, we will share the video of your workshop with our guests, and of course with you as well. Yeah, I'm looking forward for further collaboration and further innovations from your side.
Thank you so much, Katerina.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.